Welcome to this elementary writing webinar. This is the second webinar in the elementary writing series, and it's designed to help teachers get a great start to the writing process, specifically with the step of pre-writing. This webinar will not only give some steps to help get students started in the writing process, but it will also give some concrete examples that can be used with various grade levels, ranging from kindergarten to 5th grade. Before we get started on the details, let's take a look again at the overview of the writing process from part 1 of this series. The writing process consists of 5 parts: pre-writing, writing, revising, editing, and publishing. But remember, writing is recursive. This is the diagram that shows a clear example of that recursive nature. Too often the process is presented as a linear lockstep process, which violates the very nature of writing. And remember, something has been added to this traditional writing process, and that is that students need feedback, whether it's formal or informal, lengthy or brief, but students just need that feedback to gain confidence with early writing. Many people question the importance of pre-writing, especially in elementary school. To me, it is critical. Let me give you an analogy. You are getting ready to go on a trip. What is important? Where are you going? What will you pack? Do you know the best way to get there? These are important questions to ask before you leave. If you don't figure these things out before, it could be a recipe for disaster. The same thing goes for writing. Pre-writing gives you a roadmap for your writing. It tells you where you are going, the purpose, who is important and what's important to pack or include, that intended audience, and what is your destination or goal and the best way to get there, the type of writing or prompt. This pre-writing roadmap helps writers develop and organize ideas that give them the best way to get there. However, not all trips require this much planning. The same can be said for writing. So there may be times that a quick write may be fine for students. However, the writing process with elementary students will be strengthened by showing students the strategies of pre-writing and planning for success. So yes, pre-writing is important, even in elementary school. During pre-writing, the writer makes the most important decisions about his or her writing, choosing a topic, determining the purpose, identifying the audience, and beginning to develop and organize ideas. There are a variety of pre-writing techniques. Some of the more popular pre-writing techniques include free writing, brainstorming, clustering or mapping, asking questions, making lists, and drawing. Each writer must find the one or ones that work for him or her. You may be saying, okay, I get it, pre-writing is important, but you just told me to just write. So why can't I just give a student a pencil and a paper? Let's look into it a little deeper. Pre-writing truly begins with knowing what to write about, when you begin really writing your draft. There are many ways we can provide this information to students. As we continue to talk about how students write every day, the prompt and purpose become very important. Understanding the prompt is one issue seen with many writers from elementary to college. This can be seen several ways, such as choosing the topic, which is when students have free rein to write about anything of their choosing, or understanding the prompt, where they must read and ascertain what they are being asked to do in the writing prompt. Choosing the topic basically is where we tell students to write what you know. Like this cartoon, many students are told to write what they know. However, most students don't think they know anything worth writing about. They think that their lives are not exciting enough or important enough to write about. What you know isn't just what you see around you. It's not only the life you have lived so far. You know a lot more than that. You know what frightens you. You know how you feel when you're afraid. You can draw upon these feelings to make your stories believable to others. Your fear of dark places, of the unknown, of pain and death, as well as love, happiness, sadness, anger, the full range of emotions common to all of us. And don't forget the other thing you know, the people around you, the people you have known in the past. Details about these people will also make the stories or characters come alive to your readers. We want students to take what they know and put it in their writing, but they will need direction. In kindergarten up to 2nd grade, keep in mind students will need guidance to make these choices. One way to help is to let literature guide them. Mentor text will be discussed later in this webinar and provide some help in the writing process. Let's move on to understanding the prompt. One of the most common issues with writing is ensuring that the prompt is answered. Students must be taught to analyze prompts so that they can ensure they answer what is being asked. Students need to address the following questions before they start writing. What does the prompt say? You can even have the beginning students underline the important parts and enumerate what they need to answer. What type of writing is required? What is the purpose? What information do I need? What kind of details or arguments does the writing prompt suggest, and would these points make good paragraphs? Who is the intended audience, and what are the audience expectations? We will discuss appropriate prompts and tasks for grade levels later in this webinar series, but keep in mind one way to help bridge the gap between known and unknown for students is mentor text. Mentor text are pieces of literature that both you and your students can return to and reread for many different purposes. They are texts to be studied and imitated. Mentor text helps students take risks and become better writers. On the next slide, you will see some examples of text that can be used to model the craft of writing, such as writing a strong lead. Any quality text can serve as a mentor text. If you want students to write a convincing opinion persuasive text that includes evidence, then show them examples. If you want them to craft a descriptive story filled with dialogue and details, you need to show them what that looks like and talk about it. These mentor texts can be used to model teaching points like style, form, conventions, text structures, word choice, craft, and genre. The next slide contains links to additional resources that provide ideas for writing and how to make the most of mentor text. Take a moment to pause this video and write down these resources. In order to be able to create texts which are authentic, that is, written with a specific purpose and with a particular audience in mind, it's essential to locate examples of a wide variety of text. You need to read these texts carefully and identify the specific features of each. You can then use these authentic examples or to model your own text to help your students understand different types and formats of text. Each piece of writing needs to have a clear purpose. Without a purpose, the writer does not have a clear direction for his or her writing. Purpose is the goal or aim of a piece of writing, either to express oneself, to provide information, to persuade, or to create a literary work. A writer also needs to know what the format is to use. A biography is a very different format than a short story. A news report is a very different format than an instructional manual. An advertisement is a very different format than an editorial. Students need to ask themselves, what's the purpose of my writing, and what is the best format for that purpose? Writing is everywhere. We write to keep records of events or information, to make sense of something, or to shape a new idea. We write to prove that we've learned something in school and to summarize the things we've read. We write to explain and help readers understand difficult concepts. We write to analyze, to theorize, and to entertain our readers. Knowing the purpose of the writing determines not only the type of writing to do, but also the audience that we're writing to. Knowing those two things determines how the writing is developed and organized. Motivation and audience awareness is another key component to getting on the right road. In the first webinar, we talked about audience awareness. Just as a reminder, nothing motivates students more than having a real audience. When students know that their writing has a real purpose in the world, they care about their writing and they work harder at the craft of writing. The reality is that competence builds confidence, and when students become better writers, they want to write. They become better writers through daily instruction, practice, and feedback. While information on the developmental sequence of organizing can be sketchy, anecdotal information suggests that children follow this rough sequence when writing. 1. Sorting into categories. 2. Structuring the categories into a specific order for best communication, using criteria such as which item will best work to catch readers' attention in the opening. 3. Within a category, sequence information into a specific order for best communication, using criteria such as what will best persuade an audience. At each level, it's important that student writers discuss their decisions. They should understand that categories for a certain topic could be structured in several different ways, and they could all be correct. And finally, a final skill acquired is the ability to omit information that is not needed in order to communicate effectively. Even sketchier is information on what types of organization are required first, but anecdotal information and research suggests that even young children understand chronological information, making narratives the easiest type of student writing. Persuasive writing usually requires logical thinking, and studies in child development indicate that logical thinking is not present until a child is 10 to 12 years old, making it one of the later writing skills to acquire. Before this age, persuasive writing will rely mostly on emotional arguments. However, students can be taught these skills. We will show you some common pre-writing graphic organizers that might help your students. There are many graphic organizers that will help your students get their ideas on paper. The hamburger organizer and pencil organizer shows students some basic steps of paragraph writing and could even be modified for longer pieces such as essays. The bubble map allows students to list ideas connected to the topic, which helps with vocabulary development and idea generation. The graphic organizers on this page help students with narrative and compare and contrast writing. There are many organizers, story maps, that are available for use for narratives and compare and contrast. One word of caution is to ensure that your graphic organizer uses the same common language that you are using in the classroom. This last slide shows compare and contrast double bubble map and opinion Oreo graphic organizer. There are, again, many organizers out there, and even outlines work. The most important thing to remember about sharing these with children is that there has to be modeling and gradual release. Students will not just know what to do, but must receive instruction. One of the downfalls of organizers is that students sometimes have difficulty taking the information from the organizer into their writing. This can be greatly helped by modeling with write-alouds and shared writings that was discussed in the first webinar. Pre-writing is definitely an important step in the writing process, and some would argue the most important. Looking back at the gradual release chart, remember, students will not automatically know how to engage in this pre-writing process. They will need some support before they are ready to go on their own. One of the most difficult pieces of the writing process is actually getting the ideas on the paper. Gradual release will ensure that students have the support needed before they strike out on their own. Tasks or prompts that are relevant, rigorous, and realistic are important when it comes to writing. These 3 R's help both students and teachers make the roadmap to writing a little smoother. Let's look at each of these 3 more in depth. Let's start with relevant. Relevant means that the student is able to have some connection to the task. It could be something they are familiar with or just something they're interested in. It needs to have meaning of some sort to the student. This directly relates to grade level as well. Some great ideas may not be age appropriate. Students need to be able to find research that matches their Lexile level about the topic or have some background knowledge. This does not mean that they cannot write fictional pieces, but it means that it needs to have some sort of meaning. For example, if a student who has lived their whole life in Miami is writing about the effects of a blizzard, they will have to have some research on it or be given some information since they have never experienced it firsthand. Again, students do not have to only write about things they know, but it will be easier for them to make connections if the topic has some relevance or can make some connection to the student. Rigorous means the students have to think. Writing easily lends itself to tasks with rigor. I really like this acronym for ways to increase rigor from Dr. Justin Tart. R, raise the level of content. I, increase the complexity. G, give appropriate support and guidance. O, open your focus. And R, raise expectations. Remember that oftentimes the task of writing can easily lend itself to rigor, especially when it is an authentic audience and includes a real-world connection that students find relevant and worthy. And realistic is just that, being real about expectations of students and time frames. Writing must be able to be done by the students in the time frame with the information they have. Time is always an issue in school. It's often difficult to find time every day, so ensure that students have the time to devote to the type of writing they will be doing. For example, it would be difficult for students to complete research paper on a Friday afternoon. One other big issue is realistic in regards to the student's level of maturity and preparation. Scaffolding needs to be used with students to support them to write. Scaffolding can take place through vocabulary interventions or just modeling the pre-writing process. As we continue learning about the writing process, it becomes evident that starting off strong is a key to success. With a solid and successful pre-writing experience, students will find the writing process to be a little smoother. Initially, students just begin getting ideas on paper in a rough form, not being burdened by all the conventions of writing expected in final drafts. During the drafting stage of writing, a student develops a more cohesive text and explores his or her topic, directed by purpose, audience, genre, and content. Drafting helps students expand upon, clarify, and modify their initial plans and ideas, and it helps them organize their content into a meaningful sequence or flow. It is also helpful to provide students with explicit instruction on how to transform ideas and notes into strong sentences and paragraphs. Strategies include color-coding sample words and phrases that can be combined into sentences, modeling sentence combining, and teaching students to use transition words. Show students how to write different types of sentences, paragraphs, and other draft text for different purposes and audiences. So as we finish up this webinar on pre-writing, it would be remiss to not address the various student levels that teachers will see in regards to age and developmental appropriateness for children. The expectation of a successful kindergarten student is going to look much different than the expectation of a fifth grader. Our next webinar will focus on the role of the writing process and the writer in regards to types of text. By focusing on relevant, rigorous, and realistic writing tasks for students, students will be set up for success for writing in the future.